Now, my migration story is not quite what you'd expect a migration story to be, because I was born in Chicago, never lived anyplace else. But both my parents were born in Mississippi. They were children of farmers. My dad's father was a truck farmer, whatever that is, and my mother's family raised cows, pigs, not a lot of cows, but enough cows for milk, pigs, and hens and things like that. Well, mother was a dreamer. She wanted to see the world. But back in those days, women were not quite free to see the world or travel, around as they wanted to. So she contented herself with growing up in a community and becoming a two-room schoolhouse teacher. She eventually moved up to what's called the jeans teacher. Now, I'm not quite sure exactly how that worked, but I think because teachers were traditionally in a 1 or 2 room schoolhouse, you were scattered all over the county. Somebody had to supervise them, and that was the jeans teacher. If I remember correctly, the word jean is spelled just like Jean in a girl's name, so I had no idea what it meant. But my father was just the opposite. Dad was a farmer's child who had absolutely no intention of farming. He might have been kind of known as the black sheep of the family. He was a little bit wild, but my grandparents obviously were indulgent because he got away with a lot. By the time he was in his 20s, he had traveled from Mississippi to Florida, injured himself on a motorcycle accident, traveled to Cuba, spent some time playing professional ball. I don't know where and when he found the time to become a Baptist preacher. But I was reminded often as a kid, luckily he was not a pastor of a church at the time, because we would often run into people who would look at us and say, "Oh, you must be Reverend Mitchell's child." And we knew Reverend Mitchell. I didn't know he was a Reverend Mitchell. But anyway, when my parents met, I'm not quite sure how they met because we've heard different stories from different sides of the family. My dad's cousin swears that he's the one that, because my mother was his teacher, he's the one that introduced my parents. My dad's sister, because she taught in one of those 2-room schoolhouses with my mother, said that she's the one that introduced my mother and my father. My father never said how, my mother never said how, so that's still a mystery. Well, my dad's sister had married a few years before and moved to Chicago. So, because Dad was no way going to be a farmer and Mother had no intention of being a farmer's wife, they came to Chicago. Now, I thought all of us were born in Chicago, but my oldest sister somehow was born in Mississippi. Now, that's another thing we didn't find out until, I really don't remember when we found it out, but we found it out late because we were assuming we were all born in Chicago because we know when my parents moved to Chicago. I guess it was one of those cases where when you're having your first child, you want to be close to your mother or your mother-in-law or somebody, and so they went south to have Bernice, but Bernice is the only child that was born not in Chicago. The other 8 of us were born here. I was born in Cook County Hospital, the next sister was born in Cook County Hospital, and all the rest of the children were born at home. Now that sounds strange for a big city, I know, but at that time they had traveling doctors and nurses who would come as a team and deliver the child. And it's kind of funny because of our experiences. I thought, you know how kids are curious about how children are born. I was never curious because I thought I knew. I remember distinctly when my sister Leela was born. I think I was about 7 years old that year, but later that year. I was sitting on the front step because we were not allowed to stay in the house while the child was being born. And the doctor's team arrived, and he didn't have a baby with him when he came. And we had a baby sister while they were there. So I figured, okay, they did not bring any kid in here that I saw. She must have been in that little black bag. So it was really nice to be so innocent back then. Now, we did migrate all over this city practically when I was a kid. By the time I was second grade, I was in my 4th school. I attended Burke School, McCosh, and Oakland before I got to 3rd grade. And from second half of 2nd grade up, I was at Jenner School. We stayed in the same house from that time until, well, I stayed until I got married. My mother stayed in that same house until 1963 when my father passed. Now, although we started out on the south side because that's where my aunt lived. We lived with her for a few years, or I shouldn't say we, my parents lived with her for a few years. And then they moved around the corner. By that time I was born, so we lived practically all over the south side. My mother used to say that as soon as she got accustomed to being in a place or liking a place, my dad became dissatisfied and we moved. And that's why we were in so many places before I got to the second half of 2nd grade. Now, the second half of 2nd grade, I grew up in an unbelievable neighborhood. It was during World War II. My father was working at Swift and Company, which was considered necessary for the defense because they supplied meat to the Army. And the house, we lived in government housing that was built special for people who had something to do with the armed forces. Either you had a parent who was serving in the armed forces or someone who worked at a company that was vital to the nation because of the armed forces or something like that. We had so many different cultures and people from so many backgrounds in that one little neighborhood. We were kind of situated between Lake Michigan and the Chicago River, east and west. And the Chicago River again on the south, and north we were just neighborhood after neighborhood, I guess. But because we were in the middle of so many different ethnic groups, we kind of got mixed up as to who is what and what is what. For years, we didn't know that St. Joseph's Day was an Italian holiday because everybody celebrated St. Joseph. Everybody celebrated St. Patrick's. We were surrounded by Catholic churches, Baptist churches, Methodist churches. We even had some of, in those days we called it sanctified. I'm not really sure what it was, but they would put up tents in the summertime and have revivals, and it would scare the heck out of us because we didn't know what was going on, but we couldn't help but pass the place, and so you just see under the bottom of the tent, and people would have, the tent cymbals. People would have cymbals and tambourines, and they'd bang on them and jump around and do whatever it was they were doing. And of course, I grew up Baptist. My parents were Baptist, but my parents were very liberal. And so when we got to an age where we could travel on our own, we were allowed to go to anybody's church we wanted to go to. So I might be in a Methodist church one Sunday, a Catholic church the next Sunday. roll back to a Baptist church the Sunday after. I mean, I was having a good old time with the churches, but we had lots of churches. If you've seen The Godfather, you know the ceremony that they do when they bring the statue of Christ out with the dollars and things, they did that in our neighborhood. And we thought, because it came out of the Catholic Church, that's a Catholic custom. I thought all Catholics everywhere did that. We had neighbors that were from India, so we learned a little bit about why my friend's mother had that little dot right here, and why some of them didn't have that little dot. We had children who were from Filipino families. We had just about everything. We even had, although it was close to the war, it was during the war actually, we even had Germans and Russians. And a lot of my friends came from families where they'd only been in America, say, for 2 generations. Some had only been here for 1. One thing that I really envied when I was a kid was some of my friends had foreign languages. They could speak 2 languages. I wanted to speak 2 languages so bad. But my family, of course, only spoke 1 language. So when Pig Latin became popular, I became really good at Pig Latin. So I could speak something. But, and I could not understand why my friends who were busy being Americanized were ashamed of the fact that their grandparents only spoke Italian or German or whatever it was. And that they really didn't understand what an opportunity they had knowing more than 1 language. Now, I think I've just about told everything I wanted to tell about our neighborhood, especially about, oh no I haven't, the advantages we had. We had more libraries in that little neighborhood. We had more churches. We didn't have to leave the neighborhood for anything. We had more ethnic groups. We had Italian restaurants. We had Chinese restaurants. We had soul food restaurants, but back then they didn't call it soul food. I can't think of any ethnic group that we were not familiar with at that time. One of the reasons that I became familiar with classical music at an early age was I babysat for a Russian woman. And she had a Tchaikovsky and a Romanov collection you would not believe. And although I was a young, not quite teen at the time, she allowed me to use the record player as long as I used it carefully, put the things back the way, they were and all. And so I became fascinated with Tchaikovsky. I still love to listen to his music. And now I think I am finished.
Thank you. I'm amazed that you mentioned a truck farmer because